Hello and welcome to this video. This is Crafty Rhea. Today I'm going to be wrangling my scrap drawer. I have several drawers of scrap paper. This one happens to be my patterned paper scrap drawer. I have one full of plain colored cardstock, one with Christmas paper, and one with the specialty papers like glitter paper and that sort of thing. I kind of keep all those together in my drawer full of full sheets. But sometimes these drawers can get out of hand. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a neat way that I'm going to decide to try to organize this a little bit. I mostly use my paper in sizes that are 5 by 7 or 4 1/4 by 5.5 cards. So I'm going to cut my paper down, excuse me, I'm going to cut my paper down to those sizes whenever possible. And then I will do something with the smaller pieces after. So what I'll start doing is getting out the bigger pieces that I know are bigger than 5 by 7. So I'm going to go through my drawer and just set all of my really big pieces aside. Now I don't know if they're exactly 5 by 7 or not, so I'm just getting the larger pieces out of here. And this scrap drawer is pretty much a mess. I have not cleaned it at all prior to this video. Some of it I stuck in here that were that was from junk mail and that sort of thing. So we'll set that aside as well. Okay, I think that's all of my really big pieces. Got a couple of these that are big. So I can go through these big pieces, take a 5 by 7 card base, and see what ones fit. Like this one's not big enough. That one's not big enough. These are, so I will set this aside and just go through and take out all of the ones that I can cut down to a 5 by 7. This stack here is 8.5 by 11 paper. I'm going to set that aside and put it in my 8.5 by 11 paper drawer. And I think that's what I will do with any of the pieces that are 8.5 by 11 or larger. I will set those aside as well. So I will get one of these 8.5 by 11 pieces out and use it as a guide. Like this one here I could cut down to 8.5 by 11, so I'll do that. And I have a couple really large pieces that I could cut down to 8.5 by 11. Those aren't big enough. That will be big enough. And that will be big enough. So these really large ones, I think I'll cut to 8.5 by 11, and I will keep those separate. And then anything that's smaller than 8.5 by 11, I will cut down to 5 by 7. I'll go ahead and do that off camera, and I'll be back and show you what I've got. As I'm cutting these down, if I have a crazy edge like this, or a piece that's like this, or this is from the edge of that Friends paper, and it doesn't really make any sense because you can't read the words, those I will pitch. I will trim off this very crazy edge here and then go from there. And I'll cut this down to 8.5. Actually, I'll trim the other side off. I'm trying to trim off all of the ragged edges and keep the nicer edges. So then, so far I have all of these 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. I will continue to cut my paper down to that size and also to 5 by 7, and I'll be back in a bit. Alright, so I did a bunch of cutting, and that left me with a stack of papers that is 5 by 7 and a stack of papers that's 8.5 by 11. On something like this where there's just a design on part of it, I tried to keep the design intact as much as possible. Most of them did not have designs, but if they had a jagged edge or anything like that, I got rid of those bad edges. So they're all the edges are nice. So I have 8.5 by 11 and 5 by 7. You would have to just determine the sizes that you use most and cut your paper to those sizes. I'm going to show you what I do to junk mail. Here is, for example, a junk mail letter, and I usually cut the envelope apart, and then as far as this one goes, I will, let me get my other cutter so I can measure better. This one I won't be able to use as 8.5 by 11, but I can use it as a 5 by 7. And if I cut that off, this window off, I will get a piece that's 7 inches wide. But first I want to give this edge just a small cut to take the jagged edge off. And then I'll go back this way and cut this off at 7. And then I will cut it at 5. So I got a 5 by 7 sheet of paper from it, and then a smaller piece. I will also cut this smaller piece off. You could also, if you have a really nice window, you could save it to make a shaker card with. But this one is not really the best. It has some smeared lines on it. You probably can't see it. And it's, if I flip it over this way, it's not going to look very good. So keep that in mind when you are cutting cards out with windows. You might be able to use them for a shaker card. So my next step would be to, well, first I'll set all of these aside. My next step would be to get my paper drawer out and then go to the next size that I use most often. And that would be 5.5 by 4.25. Now most of the time when I put those on a card, I'm going to mat them down a little bit smaller, but I'll go ahead and keep them at that 5.5 by 4.25 size because it's easier to cut them down just in case I want to use the whole thing. So I would go through my scrap drawer and use a card base as an example, and I could just quickly hold it up to the different things. This is a card back, and I really like the way it looks. I'm not going to cut that one down. If there's a piece of paper where cutting it down would ruin the design element of the paper, then I just leave that alone. Then I would just take my papers in my drawer and see which ones would be able to be cut to this size. And I would just go through my paper drawer and pick out everything that is bigger than the card base and set those aside, because then I can easily cut those down to make more cards. So I'll go through my drawer, I'll pick out everything larger than 5.5 by 4 1/4, and I will cut them down to size, and I will be back. I'll catch you in a bit. Bye. Okay, I went through my drawer and I pulled out everything that was larger than 4 1/4 by 5.5. A couple things I kept in the drawer were paper like this, that's a map. I don't want to cut a piece off of it and waste, because this is a local map of areas near where I live, and just in case I wanted to send someone a card, like if someone lives in Circleville and I want to send them a card, I want to make sure I include that part on their card. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that piece intact the way it is. Same with this, I will leave it intact. And what I have left in my drawer are just small pieces, strips, and things like that. And you can sort this out however you want. If you want to cut them down to 3 by 3, or you can just keep going and cut them down to any size that you use. These smaller scraps I'm going to leave the way they are, because I never really know what size I want to use them. So I will then just take a lot of these larger scraps that I took out, and I will cut them down to 4 1/4 by 5.5, and I will be back. See ya in a minute. Okay, when I come across paper like this is a piece of wrapping paper that is actually from India, from the Bombay store. So I am going to square it up and cut it out as best I can. Having it left in that messy bundle, I never bothered to use it because I didn't want to deal with it. So I'm going to cut off the edges and make it square on each side to start with. Actually, it would be rectangle, but I want all 4 edges to be equal. And then I'm going to, not equal, but even, and then I'm going to take it and, like these pieces that are very wrinkly, I'm going to cut that off and just keep a strip of the nicer paper. And the really wrinkly stuff I'm going to throw away, because I know I won't use that on a card. This one here, this bottom half is wrinkly, but the top part is really good. So I'm just going to cut that there. I've had this in my stash for a couple of years, and I have not ever used it because I frankly just didn't want to deal with it. So this one here, this is very wrinkly over here. This isn't so bad, and this isn't so bad. So I'm going to cut it right around this wrinkly line. And cut off this piece that ripped from the tape. And then I have some pieces of it. And the same thing with this. I'm looking at it. I'm just trying to cut off all the wrinkly pieces and keeping the nicer pieces. And then I may actually use part of this on one of my projects. And then I'll show you what I will do with junk mail. Here's an example of a junk mail envelope. But the insides of these are really cool, very printed very nicely. So I will trim the edges of the envelope. And it won't fit inside of here, so I'm going to trim this side down just a little bit. And then I will trim both edges this way. I just want all 4 sides of the envelope to have a clean edge to start with. And then I will look at the inside and I will cut off any of this junk that I cannot use. Like, for example, I probably won't use that piece that's folded over. And nor will I use all of that up there. So if I cut it like that, I have a nice strip left over that I could use. This piece here, there's a squarish edge. It's probably not an exact square. I'm sure it's a rectangle, but there we go. And I'll do that with all of my junk mail pieces as well. I'll finish cutting these down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I will also cut my junk mail apart. I'll be back in a bit. See ya in a bit. Okay, so I have this stack of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch pieces of cardstock. I have these 2 that I left cut out to their size, since they are like postcards or, you know, cut aparts. They're perfectly sized for their design, so I'm going to leave those alone. And then what I will do is take the rest of this drawer and I'm going to separate the long strips from the chunkier pieces and just make 2 stacks. I'm not going to cut them down any further. I'm just going to sort them that way. And I'll be back. Okay, so what I'm going to do to organize this drawer, it doesn't have to be perfectly organized because I will be ruffling through it and making it a mess anyway. I'm going to take all my really big sheets, my 8 1/2 by 11, and then this piece, I didn't cut it down since it's a picture frame. I'm going to try to put these kind of on the bottom of the drawer. I have all of my really long strips over here, my 12-inch long pieces against one side of the drawer. And then back in this corner, I just kind of put all of my smaller, chunkier pieces, try to keep my strips over here. And then I have my 5 by 7 pieces here, which I could put a rubber band around if I wanted to. And then I have these guys, and then all of my 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 pieces here. So anyway, that's where we go. I think my drawer is much neater. I'll be able to come to it and say, oh look, I've got these perfectly cut out. If I just want to go through and pick them real quick, I think I will just keep them in a stack like this. Down in the bottom corner, those are my really long strips, and then over here are all my other crazy sizes that I could just look through and pick from. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I really hope it helps you wrangle your scraps and try to make heads or tails of them so that way you actually use them. If you like what you see, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. As you know, I provide a lot of videos. If you like to recycle Christmas cards and to use your stash and recycle things, this is the place to be, because that's what I love to do. Please leave me a comment below. Let me know how you organize your scraps, or if there are certain sizes you like to cut them down to. I'm always interested to hear that. So please just let me know, and I hope to see you next time. But until then, you know what to do. Go get crafting. Bye-bye.